with Chapal. You are mute, Chapal.
Mm.
Yes.
How about
Yes, we can hear you now.
okay? So I'm starting first, and I'm reading Lama Tsongkhapa's biography to give us some kind of insight into his story and the person that he was and his great deeds. In the time of the Buddha Shakyamuni, the Bodhisattva's strength of mind had recently incarnated as son of a Brahmin. Upon meeting the Lord Buddha, the young boy was moved and immediately made a strong aspiration to free all beings from the myriad sufferings of samsara. He then went up to the Buddha, prostrated 3 times, and offered up his crystal mala. Upon receiving the mala, the Buddha placed his hands on the boy's head and predicted that 1500 years in the future, in the land of the red-faced barbarians to the north, this young boy, who offered him this mala, would revitalize the teachings when they become degenerated. He also prophesied that the boy's future incarnation would be an emanation of Manjushri and would be named Satyakirti or Lobsangdraka in Tibet. As the morning star was shining bright and clear in the sky, and the crisp fall night was giving way to the dawning of a new day, a child was born in the Tsongkha region of Dokkan, a section of Amdo in Tibet, in the 10th month of the Firebird year in the 6th 60-year cycle of the Tibetan calendar. By Western reckoning, this would place the birth sometime in October of 1357. This child would later grow up to be a great philosopher and unifier of the Dharma, eventually becoming known across the world by the mononym Tsongkhapa, the man from Onion Valley. Tsongkhapa was the fourth of 6 children born to Lubum Ge and his wife Shingtsa Ashe. His mother was a devout Buddhist, known for her compassion for the poor, her devotion to circumambulating temples, and reciting Om Mani Padme Hum, the 6-syllable mantra of compassion. His father's faith, the Dharma, was deep, and he was often heard chanting the names of Manjushri. While Tsongkhapa's mother belonged to the Xing clan, his father was from the renowned Mal clan, which had a tradition of sons entering the monastery. From the time of his conception, his mother continually experienced auspicious dreams. For example, she dreamt things such as Vajrapani throwing vajras from the heavens, which softly and gently landed on her womb, and Manjushri appearing and casting his sword in the direction of her stomach. Just before she gave birth, she dreamt that many monks were looking for a Buddha and inquired where his shrine was. A young boy appeared and pointed to Tsongkhapa's mother's womb. The young boy had a key which opened up a box in her womb, and inside was Chenrezig, or Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. These and other highly auspicious signs clearly showed that it was not just one holy being or an emanation of a holy being that would be entering Lama Tsongkhapa's mother's womb, but the actual 3 bodhisattvas themselves. When he was born, his mother suffered no pain. Many dakas and dakinis were heard singing outside with beautiful voices. Rainbows appeared in the sky for miles around. After Tsongkhapa's birth, his placenta was buried in the ground, and from that exact spot, a giant sandalwood tree sprung up with more than 100,000 leaves, featuring the images of Simananda, the Simananda form of Avalokiteshvara, and emblazoned with the mantras of Manjushri. Every autumn, when the leaves fell on the ground, the pilgrims would reverently collect and keep them. When the leaves were crushed and made into medicine, people who ate them would become healed. That tree became known as the tree of Kumbum, or the great tree of merit, and is still standing today. The day after he was born, the Kadampa master Chögyam Dondru Rinchen sent some gifts to Tsongkhapa and his family, with explanations on how to protect the newborn. When asked by Tsongkhapa's father at a later date how he knew of his birth, Dondru Rinchen said that he had been dreaming of Yamataka for a while, and when he requested blessings from him, he indicated that he would come to the area of Tsongkha at the same time tomorrow. Chögyam Rinchen paid regular visits to the family and began to instruct the young boy. By the age of 3, the toddler Tsongkhapa had learned to recite mantras of Manjushri and Sarasvati. It is said that his recitation of Manjushri's mantra was so strong and powerful that the syllables themselves appeared on the wall of his room as if they had been carved there. During one of these frequent visits, Chögyam Rinchen brought with him offerings consisting of yaks, horses, and sheep, as well as other material gifts for Tsongkhapa's family. He then asked them that he be allowed to raise the young boy, to which his father consented with delight. Shortly after his reception, Chögyam brought Tsongkhapa to take layman vows from the fourth Karmapa Ropé Dorje, whereby he received the name Kunga Ningpo. Then, at the age of 8, he received the novice monk's ordination from his own mentor, Chögyam Rinchen, who bestowed upon him the name Lobsang Drakpa, excellent nobility and repute, in honor of a former teacher of his, Chim Lobsang Drakpa. Tsongkhapa spent much of this time studying with Dondru Rinchen and was said to have been so sharp that he could easily understand and memorize even the most complicated texts. Chögyam Rinchen also gave him a great number of tantric empowerments, most importantly, that of Yamantaka. According to his secret biography, from the age of 7, he began experiencing visions of Atisha and Vajrapani. This communication with various Dharma masters of the past and tantric deities would eventually become pivotal in the development of Tsongkhapa's comprehension of Buddhism. On the advice of his teacher, at the age of 16, the young Tsongkhapa traveled to the central region of Utsang, following in the footsteps of his precious Lama. He would never again return home. There, he studied with more than 50 different eminent Buddhist scholars. As he described later in his autobiography, he studied at length texts and topics such as the 5 works of Maitreya and their commentaries by masters such as Asanga, Vasubandhu's Abhidharma, and the Madhyamika system of Nagarjuna and his heart disciple Aryadeva. Drawing on inspiration from such figures such as Sakya Pandita Kunga Gyaltsen and Bhutan Rinchen Drup, it was his rigorous dedication to philosophical analysis and logic that would eventually become defining aspects of the tradition that he would later become the founder of. In Utsang, the young Tsongkhapa's studies were mainly focused on the scholarly trends at the time, of which the most important were those taught at Sakya and Sangpu monasteries. In the autumn of 1373, he traveled to central Tibet, to Drikung Kagyu Monastery, where he studied and trained with Chenga Chukyi Gyalpo and studied the 5 sections of Mahamudra and Bodhicitta. From there, he traveled on to Nyentang, one of the largest monasteries of the day, and was tutored by Tashi Sengi and Densapa Gekong. In his 20s, Lama Tsongkhapa was already gaining great renown for his sharp comprehension and skilled speech. The number of his disciples was growing, and it's decided by Tsongkhapa that he would need to become a fully ordained monk. He went to Namgyal Monastery in the region of Yarlung, whereupon he took his ordination vows from the Sakya Lama Kashipa Tsochim Rinchen in the presence of 20 other Sangha members. One of his main teachers was the Sakya master Rendawa Junuru, a powerful proponent of the Prasangika Madhyamika view. Tsongkhapa's devotion to Rendawa was so great that he originally composed the famed Miktsema verse in praise of him. However, Rendawa felt that the verse was more applicable and descriptive of his own students' qualities, and thus offered the prayer back to him. In addition to Donju Rinchen, some of Tsongkhapa's main tantric gurus included the Drikung Kagyu Lama Chenga Sonam Gyaltsen, from whom he received the 6 yogas of Nopa, the Dhanam Lama Chukle Namge, from which he received the Kala Chakra cycle, and the Sakya master Rinchen Dorje, who bestowed upon him teachings on the Lamdre method and the Hivajra Tantra. Notably, he also received the Guhya Samaja cycle from Kyungpo Lejunson, a prominent disciple of Bhutan Shiju, the Chakrasam body mandala from the master Lama Dampa Songyaltsen Pasango. Tsongkhapa studied all levels of Tantra, not just limiting himself to the highest Yoga Tantras. He extensively studied the act performance in Yoga Tantras as well, emphasizing the importance of the gradual approach in his own autobiography. Throughout his studies, Lama Tsongkhapa's comprehension of Madhyamika philosophy gradually became more concrete and experiential. By the time his early 20s rolled around, he had begun composing his most important early work, The Golden Garland of Eloquence, the main topic of which deals with the perfection of wisdom and serves as a supplement to Vimuktisena's Vritti and Haribhadra's Aloka commentaries. Although Je Rinpoche is credited with being the original author of his writings, many were composed via the instruction and inspiration of tantric deities that he communed directly with in visions, particularly Manjushri, as elucidated in his secret biography. Initially, he relied upon his teachers to communicate with various deities on his behalf. For example, his Nyingma teacher Namkha Gyaltsen possessed the ability to speak directly with Vajrapani and acted as an intermediary between Tsongkhapa and the Lord of Secrets himself. It was in precisely this way that Tsongkhapa initially relied upon one of his main teachers, the Kagyu Lama Umapa Pawo Dorje, to act as an intermediary with Manjushri upon coming into contact with him at the age of 33. By this time, Lama Tsongkhapa had finished his work on the Golden Garland of Eloquence and was now intimately studying Chandrakirti's Introduction to the Middle Way under the instruction of Lama Umapa. Teacher and student then undertook a retreat together during this period, where Tsongkhapa was able to pose numerous questions to Manjushri himself via the medium of Lama Umapa. Over time, Tsongkhapa began to experience visions of the deity himself and was eventually able to communicate with Manjushri directly, receiving different instructions and tantric empowerments, most importantly those related to Manjushri and Yamantaka. Over the course of his life, Lama Tsongkhapa continued to receive visions of Manjushri as well as a plethora of other tantric deities and past masters, such as Asanga and Nagarjuna. Except for a short period during which he taught, Tsongkhapa continued to engage in intensive retreats. He and a community of his closest began a long retreat at Okla Chulung in 1392. During this retreat, they completed extensive preliminary practices. For example, completing in all 3.5 million prostrations in conjunction with purification practice of the 3 heaps. As a result of this, his imprint could be clearly seen on the ground of Hermitage. He also made 1.8 million mandala offerings during this time, by the conclusion of the retreat 4 years later. After this time, Je Rinpoche traveled to Jingji, where he performed the first of his 4 great deeds, the restoration of a famous statue of Maitreya. After seeing the dilapidated state of the temple and the main statue of Maitreya, a great aspiration arose in him to aid in its restoration, and so he propitiated Zambala for aid. As a result, many resources came to Tsongkhapa in order to fund the restoration of the temple and of the great statue. In 1398, Tsongkhapa attained realization and perfect understanding of the Madhyamika view. The genesis of this realization began with a dream in which he stood before an assembly of great Indian Prasangika masters discussing the Dharma. Immediately following this experience, he composed his poetic Praise to Dependent Origination. The impactful experience marked a new era in Lama Tsongkhapa's life, one which moved towards composition and teaching others the amazing things in which he had discovered. This came to a head in 1402, where at the age of 46 at Rateng Monastery, he composed his magnum opus, the Lamrim Chenmo, known in English as the Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment. Based on Atisha's Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, it elucidated the gradual path to enlightenment in a detailed manner from a sutra perspective. It is said that Tsongkhapa was initially unsure if most readers would be able to understand his explanations of emptiness contained in the latter third of this work. However, Manjushri, clearly beholding the great benefit that it would serve to sentient beings, urged him to finish this treatise. During the period of decline that trailed after Atisha's passing in the middle of the 10th century, monastic communities in Tibet had not conscientiously observed the rules of the Vinaya, vows had degenerated, and the Sangha at large had become corrupt and often indulged in worldly pleasure. Under the auspices of his teachers Rendawa and Shenga Chukyi Gyalpo, in 1402 he performed his second great deed. While staying at Namtsedang during the rainy season, he gave an extremely clear, vivid, and detailed commentary on the Vinaya to an enormous assembly of monks. It was with this act that he followed in the footsteps of Atisha Dipamkara and revived the monastic adherence to discipline in the land of snows. In 1408, the Yongle Emperor of the Ming Dynasty sent an invitation to Tsongkhapa to visit his court and capital in Nanjing. Tsongkhapa refused, citing his age and desire to remain in retreat, and a second invitation was sent in 1413. Although he again refused, he delegated his student, Shakya Yeshe, to go in his stead. Shakya Yeshe endured a wonderfully successful trip to China, at the end receiving the title of Jamchin Shuje from the emperor. The material offerings he garnered from this trip enabled him to establish Sera Monastery in 1419. After the passing of the Yongle Emperor in 1424, Shakya Yeshe visited the Xuande Emperor's new capital of Beijing. Through these visits, the first links were forged between Tsongkhapa's new tradition and the emperors of China. This relationship would last all the way until the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1911. Lama Tsongkhapa also composed multiple works during the period of 1407 to 1408, most notably among these being a commentary on Nagarjuna's verses on the Middle Way, entitled An Ocean of Reasoning. It was also during this time that he composed The Essence of Eloquence. During the first fortnight of Losar in 1409, Lama Tsongkhapa instituted the Munlam Chenmo, or Great Prayer Festival, in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. This celebration is traditionally centered at the holy Jokang Temple in Lhasa and is counted as Tsongkhapa's third great deed. It was during this time that he also offered jeweled ornaments and a crown to the statue of the Jo Shakyamuni, the most sacred statue, blessed by the Buddha himself, housed in the Jokang, and the most sacred in all of Tibet. By offering these ornaments, the statue was transformed from being a form body representation of the Buddha into one representing the enjoyment body manifestation. In 1415, he wrote the middle-length treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, which is a condensed version of his great Lamrim Chenmo. In addition to his sutric literature, Je Rinpoche was also a prolific author on Tantra. In 1405, he wrote Ngakrem Chenmo as a companion volume to the Lamrim Chenmo, otherwise known as the Great Treatise on the Tantric Stages of the Path to Enlightenment. It spanned all four classes of Tantra, according to the New Translation traditions, including a vivid explanation of the two stages of highest Yoga Tantra. Following that, in 1411, he composed his famous exposition on the 5 stages of Guhya Samaja. In 1410, at the heartfelt request of his students and the wish that he stop traveling, Tsongkhapa established his own monastery. It would eventually become the largest monastery in Tibet. During the construction of the prayer hall, he commissioned the building of a giant Buddha Shakyamuni statue in copper 3-dimensional representations of the mandalas of his main highest Yoga Tantra deities, Guhya Samaja, Yamantaka, and Chakrasambhara. Temples for these constructions were completed in 1415, and the mandalas and deities were installed in 1417. These acts are counted as his 4th great deed. At the age of 62, Tsongkhapa Lobsang Drakpa passed into parinirvana in 1419 at his home monastery of Ganden, a year after completing his exposition Illumination of the Thought in 1418. He exhibited the aspect of achieving enlightenment after death by displaying the illusory body, a culmination of his practice of Father Tantra, Anuttara Yoga Tantra. His body was entombed inside of a jeweled stupa at Ganden. His parinirvana is commemorated annually with the Ganden Ngamche festival, which translates as the Ganden offering on the 25th, during which countless butter lamps are lit by his devotees. Before passing away, he gave his hat and robe to Gyaltsab Dharma Rinchen, designating him as his spiritual successor. Gyaltsab Je then in turn appointed Kedrup Gelek Pelsang, another heart disciple of Je Rinpoche, as the 3rd throne holder of Ganden in 1431. 589 years and 101 Ganden Tripas later, the Gelug tradition that Lama Tsongkhapa founded has continued to grow and flourish across the continent of Jambudvipa. And that's it. Any questions?
Okay, thank you very much. And also, I share the 2 short Lama Tsongkhapa's bio on our chat or also WhatsApps. This is composed by Lama Tsongkhapa his own. The short bio, one called let me see, the spring of what's it? Oh, okay. The one calls this songs of experience, and then another call.
My computer froze.
Sorry.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay. my computer froze, so I can hear you, kind of, but I can't move my mouse or anything. So I'm just
No, that's fine. That's fine.
okay. Yeah,
I just sharing with the people here another called Destiny Fulfill. So this Destiny Fulfill is Lama Tsongkhapa's more scholarly the bio, and then Song of Experience is his spirituality bio, and they both are very short. And then it's composed by Lama Tsongkhapa himself by himself. Therefore, today after we finish the class, maybe it's good to read both. Okay, thank you very much. And then now, if you have any question for Chopal, so please, yeah, mute by yourself and please unmute after that.
Yeah, I had a question, but Chappelle's disappeared. Can you answer? So, how did they know he reached paranirvana? How do they know that when he died? I didn't quite understand.
Chopal, you are unmute. You have to unmute.
He's not there.
okay.
Oh.
Yeah, I just turned it on. Okay. So when we say like parinirvana, this is like post death nirvana. So being that he passed away and Lama Tsongkhapa was regarded as like an enlightened being, then
Chopal, sorry, I just mute wrong one. Yeah, please, can you unmute again?
okay, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so this is like inferred by the signs that he displayed, like such as displaying the illusory body, and parinirvana is just like nirvana, like a final passing into nirvana, like post death. So it's these type of things are inferred by like the signs that he displayed and his understanding of the teaching that was put to paper and orally transmitted to his disciples.
I'm sorry, I still don't. What is an illusionary body? I'm sorry,
The illusory body. This is like a subtle body of like wind energy that is associated with the completion stage of the father highest yoga tantra.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have one question, please.
Sure.
So did he not reincarnate and continue to have, enlightened activities, or is parinirvana means he's
This is like a final passing into nirvana, kind of like the aspect of like what Buddha Shakyamuni did. Like although like he passed in that way, or he gave off the aspect of passing in that way, this is like his form body like is not remaining in this world, but his like enlightened activities still continue.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. So 60. Hi.
Hey.
So 62. You said he passed to parinirvana. Is that? It seems young. I mean, is there anything particular about 62? Was that a ripe old age for that time?
No, I think that 62 is still like generally regarded as young. But if you look at like all of the things that he accomplished during like that short period of time, that's really incredible. Like he definitely, like everything that he did is just like almost like unfathomable to somebody like myself. But he did like everything he had to do. So, when he gave the aspect of passing away at 62, like he accomplished everything. He made such a huge difference in the monastic culture and the culture in general in Tibet.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Chappelle,
Yes,
can you hear me?
yes.
Is there any information as to like what did happen to the connection to the Chinese dynasties? Like I think it was 1911. It just kind of like faded away. Is there any information about like what happened?
I think that was when like the Chinese Communist Party started to take power. So this is like when during like that same period, because their position was a more anti-religious sentiment. So with the fall of the Qing dynasty, then that type of relationship with China, came to an end during that period.
Okay, I didn't know it went back that far.
Mhm.
Like, wow. Okay, thank you.
So
Sure.
I'm sorry, the tree where his mother planted the tree and the stupa. So
Mhm.
you said that's still there? Have they?
Yes,
Oh, so it's protected
it
and
is.
oh,
There's a fence built around it.
oh, good. Thank you.
Mhm.
When you talk about the connection with the Chinese peoples, are there remnants? Are there any kind of resurgence in China of that tradition that he established?
I mean, like the data on all of that is very difficult because a lot of uh, like members, even government members of like the Chinese Communist Party, they still practice Buddhism, but they uh, do so in like a very secret, like under the radar kind of a fashion, because officially, the position is like an atheist, bordering on like anti religious sentiment for some of the practices. So getting concrete data on like how many practitioners there really are and such is difficult to say.
The question related with the Chinese, is this the question that Chinese King asked Lama Tsongkhapa for invite to China and then he didn't went there? Is this the question or some other things?
No, this is something different.
Okay. So we have a, okay, now one more question for Chappelle, if you have it. Okay, so then please, Anitendula.
I'm going to restart my computer. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much to Venerable Tripella for that very, very good biography of Lama Tsongkhapa. There's a little bit of overlap between Tripella's presentation and mine, but I think it'll work out just great. So first of all, I feel totally unqualified to be talking about Lama Tsongkhapa in general, and his writings in particular, because I realize that I've only read a very tiny fraction of his total works, and my understanding, of course, is even smaller. But I'm very grateful to Geshe Darge for the opportunity to try to speak, and for giving me a copy of Thupten Jinpa's biography, Tsongkhapa, a Buddha in the Land of Snows. He gave me this book several months ago, and since he asked me to speak, then I had to actually open the book, and it's absolutely fantastic. This is the, I admit, the only book that I read in preparing for this little talk. I know that Bob Thurman has also written a biography of Tsongkhapa, and I look forward to reading that at some point. Both of them, Thupten Jinpa and Bob Thurman, have given teachings on Lama Tsongkhapa's life. So if you have time later, or maybe you've done this already, many of those recordings are available on YouTube, and would be a good thing to do today. So Thupten Jinpa said that part of his motivation for writing his biography of Lama Tsongkhapa was to inspire the young generation of Tibetans, such as his children, his daughters, to engage in Dharma practice. He hoped to convey a sense of Tsongkhapa, Je Tsongkhapa, as a living human being and as a role model in how to successfully follow the path to enlightenment. So I find Tsongkhapa's 150% commitment to the Dharma both inspiring and at the same time really challenging. And I'm sure many of you, if you're in the same position, I find myself, having read the biography, going about my day and asking myself, gee, is this something that Lama Tsongkhapa would be doing? Am I just wasting my time in worldly pursuits? And most of the time, the answer is yes. But Je Tsongkhapa lives on, through his writings and the transmission of his unbelievable wisdom. It's been passed on to this day through generations of devout students, preserved in the monasteries, of course. And fortunately, because Tsongkhapa became well known at a young age for his groundbreaking scholarship and realizations, his writings were very carefully preserved, including not only the texts that he authored, but also his extensive correspondence with his teachers, for example, most notably Rendoa, and his students, and even the notes that his principal students took during some of his most famous teachings. All of this seems to have been very well documented and cared for through the centuries. So that's an incredible treasure of teachings that we have inherited. So in my little presentation, I'd like to give a brief overview of Tsongkhapa's writings as they developed over the course of his life. I'm going to start with a short thematic summary of his writings, and this will be followed then by a chronological description of just a few of his major works. Tsongkhapa, as Triphala mentioned, was a very prolific writer. And so what prompted him to produce a collection of 18 volumes of texts? So Tsongkhapa appears to have written primarily in response to sincere requests from other teachers and his students, and even due to receiving requests directly from Manjushri himself. Many of his works were prompted by visions of the lineage masters and deities such as Manjushri, seen in dreams or during states of meditation. So one of the key reasons why he wrote his philosophical works was to clear away what he felt were contemporary Tibetan scholars' misinterpretations of the Indian Buddhist classic texts. So by looking at going back and really digging through the source texts from with a fresh new perspective, Tsongkhapa, one of his major contributions was synthesizing and advancing the understanding of these texts that was as held by his contemporaries. So he went back, and started from the beginning, and was able to tease out, what he thought were mistaken understandings held by existing contemporary thinkers. So Tsongkhapa's writings include very moving devotional or aspirational verses. These are like praises to particular Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, such as his primary deity Manjushri, with whom he developed a very close relationship. Verses in praise to Tara, to Saravati, the goddess of literature and poetry, to Buddha Shakyamuni and Maitreya. And not surprisingly, he also wrote praises of obeisance, honoring his many gurus. He wrote many prayers and short texts. For example, a prayer for the beginning, middle, and end of practice, the beautiful prayer to be reborn in the land of bliss. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these. So throughout these writings, Tsongkhapa's heartfelt faith, his commitment, his trust are clearly evident. They shine through each of these works. He describes the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in striking detail based on the result of his intensive meditations. So I wanted to share just one example, if I can find it. Let me see. So verses from the Praise of the Buddha. This is from Splendors of the Autumn Moon. That's the title of the book. It's a collection of writings by Tsongkhapa. So this is from Praise of the Buddha, the Unrivaled Lion of the Shakyas. Just a couple of verses. Glorious body, bathing in splendor of its golden glow, voice unrivaled even by melodies of celestial musicians, mind brighter than 10 million suns, guide supreme for infinite living beings, paragon of the Shakyas. Moon and stars on a cloudless night appear crystal clear in the midst of a lake. So in the clear waters of my untroubled mind are your qualities reflected one by one. Ringed by noble bodhisattvas, as the moon is circled by stars, leading your arhat entourage, as the mighty bull leads the herd, your body dense with 1,000 garlands of golden light, filling the realms of space as you soared through the sky to arrive like the king of swans in a magical display of corporal power. And then it continues, but it's just absolutely beautiful. Oops. Hang on, I just lost my document. Where did it go? Sorry, I think I got too fancy. It absolutely just disappeared. Okay, so then in his hymns to Tara, he wrote, a kind mother never loses her love for her infant child, even when she sees him doing something wrong. So what need is there to speak of the chance of us losing your love, O mother of all beings? Never disheartened by our countless wrongs, we childish beings, falsely pursuing our own interests, you carry the burden to free all sentient beings. I admire your enlightened deeds, vast and expansive. So Je Rinpoche was also highly renowned for his poetry, and he wrote poems with complex, original poetic structures that were recognized and highly appreciated by other scholars, by his contemporaries. So I think Tsongkhapa's works can be divided into 3 broad categories. So texts related to Buddhist philosophy, and then secondly, works that synthesize and masterfully present broad topics, such as the entire sutra path, as well as the tantric path. And then finally, detailed presentations of particular highest yoga tantric practices. So then I'm going to transition using those 3 categories sort of into more of a chronological overview of his works. So completed when Tsongkhapa was only 31 years old, his first major philosophical work was The Golden Rosary, a commentary on Maitreya's Ornament of Clear Realization, and Haribhadra's influential 8th century commentary on the Clear Meaning. So Thupten Jinpa says that this work was notable because Tsongkhapa carefully compared 21 different Indian commentaries on the root text, Maitreya's root text, and examined the root text itself together with its source, which was the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So his methodology, it was typical of the scholastic methods used in current Western humanities. So it's probably worth mentioning that Tsongkhapa was working from translations of the sorts texts in Tibetan. So he had to spend a lot of time just going back and comparing different translations, much as contemporary scholars would do. So during this period, at the same time that he was studying the sutras, he also continued to deepen his Vajrayana practice and eventually experienced direct visions of Manjushri, many of the lineage masters, and other deities. Thanks to his teacher Umapa, who served as a medium between Tsongkhapa and Manjushri early on, he received the following oral instruction from Manjushri. So this is from the Vajra lines on the view of the equality of samsara and nirvana. If you're following along in the book, because all I'm doing is really pulling out excerpts from the book, we're on page 113. And I just wanted to read this because I know it's a little bit long to do over Zoom. But it's just so beautiful. Let me try it. If you guys start to fall asleep, somebody should say something. Through various examples of dependent origination, I reveal here the truth of ultimate nature just as it is. Preceded by taking refuge, gather the accumulations and purifying negative karma. Contemplate dependent origination forward and in reverse. Through profound instructions touching upon the nature of the Buddhas, body, speech, and mind. O fortunate ones who seek enlightenment, abide in equipoise in concentrative states. This host of aggregates, body, speech, and mind, none of these exists as a self, nor is there a self apart from these. O fortunate ones who seek enlightenment, know the truth of this no self, aggregates, elements, and sense bases, appearance and emptiness, samsara and nirvana, and so on. Nothing in this dependent world possesses intrinsic reality, devoid of arising, cessation, or persistence. They transcend words like exists, doesn't exist, is, and is not. The one who knows this profound, undifferentiated peace, which is free of all elaborations, will attain nirvana. So this was an oral instruction passed directly from Manjushri. Amazing, right? Just unbelievable. So, and then in 1397, after years of intensive meditative practice carried out with a small group of wandering monks, Tsongkhapa had a breakthrough in his understanding of emptiness. So there's some beautiful, beautiful quotes here. And so this profound realization was centered around the equation of this relationship between emptiness and dependent origination. And I'm just going to read one short quote here because it shows how he actually experienced this relationship in his daily life. These days, with greater familiarity with insight into emptiness, even in the post-meditation periods, I would have the perception of this entire world of diversity as being empty, yet in an illusion-like manner, maintaining its specific forms. And the perception of things as not sealed or marked by awareness of their emptiness as objective facts with intrinsic reality rarely arises in me now. You know, so it's interesting because we're always going to teachings and learning about this, but here's, you know, Je Rinpoche himself saying that he is actually experiencing this. So it's very, very, you know, inspiring, I think, those words. So he expressed his gratitude to the Buddha at the conclusion of this phenomenal experience that he had. He expresses his gratitude to the Buddha as the teacher of dependent origination in the well-known hymn in praise of dependent origination, which many of you have studied. He also wrote a brief presentation on the stages of the path for Kunchok Tsultrim, a senior monastic, as well as our beloved 3 principal aspects of the path for his earliest attendant, Tsakong Ngawang Drakpa. Then in 1400, he wrote the prayer for goodness at the beginning, the middle, and the end, as well as the Miksima verse, which he offered to Rendawa, and Rendawa returned to him. In 1401, he began writing the Lamrim Chenmo, the great stages on the path to enlightenment, at the request of the abbot of Sangpu Monastery, the abbot Lu Chen, and then also Kunchok Tsultrim and Kunchok Palsang, who was the grand abbot of Zulpu Monastery. So not only did Tsongkhapa travel extensively, you know, he was going probably hundreds of miles from place to place, and he never stayed, you know, more than a few years. Often it was, you know, just like one season at a single location. But he was also, you know, non-sectarian. So he received, and I think that's a really important point. You know, he received teachings and likewise taught students, you know, from all of the different traditions, you know, Kagyu, Sakya, Nyingma, all of that informed, you know, his work. And then later on, he, when he was at Radreng, Tsongkhapa prayed before a very famous statue of Atisha, which was believed to have been sculpted by Dromtonpa himself. And while in meditation, he had a vision of the entire lineage, including his teachers and the Buddha, all of whom dissolved into Atisha, who then placed his right hand on Tsongkhapa's head, saying, "Work extensively for the Dharma, and I will support you in your quest for enlightenment and service to sentient beings." So based on that experience, he decided that he must disseminate Atisha's teaching and legacy, especially the Lamrim tradition, right? So he had started writing, you know, a few short verses about it, the Lamrim, right, earlier on, but then, you know, based on this vision, then later on, he decided to write the Lamrim Chenmo. So he, in the Lamrim Chenmo, of course, you know, guides 3 different kinds of students all the way to enlightenment, you know, explaining the particular teachings for people of different capacities, different scopes. He also elucidates, you know, the 4 benefits of studying the Lamrim, which very briefly, the first is to recognize all Buddha's teachings to be free of contradiction. Second is to perceive all scriptures as personal instructions. The third is to easily discover the enlightened intention of the Buddhas. And fourth is to guard against the negative action of disparaging the Dharma. So as Tripala mentioned, in particular, the sections, the later chapters on concentration and wisdom are in Thupten Jinpa's words considered nothing short of definitive treatises. You know, so they were like standalone definitive treatises on these two subjects. So in terms of, you know, how were Tsongkhapa's texts, you know, passed on, transmitted, you know, across distance to his students, right? So Thupten Jinpa mentions that for the Lamrim Chemo, there was only one scribe, Sonam Sangpo, who was responsible for like copying out the text. And I guess there were no, you know, like staples where you could go and just like print out multiple copies on a copy machine, right? So Sonam Sangpo, I guess by hand would copy out the Lamrim Chemo and then, you know, give the copy to whoever Tsongkhapa intended to receive it. So that's pretty incredible, right? You couldn't just, you know, type it up and put it on Google Drive. So each, you know, word of the Dharma is so incredibly, you know, precious, right? You couldn't just record a teaching of Lama Tsongkhapa and put it on YouTube. Each word of the Dharma, so incredible, so hard to obtain, you know, and is to be something, of course, just treasured and carefully preserved. Other important works written during this time were related to the Vinaya, as Tripala mentioned, Vinaya and ethics. Venerable Je Tsongkhapa placed tremendous importance on ethics, you know, the importance of carefully guarding all of the different aspects of the Vinaya ethics, tantric ethics, bodhisattva ethics. He also wrote and taught on the 50 verses of Guru devotion. So another important point is that in response to Je Rinpoche's writings, then others, his students, you know, even his teachers, composed works around or in response to his works. So in response to the Lamrim Chemo, Gyaltsab Je composed 2 works, the Heart Ornament, an exposition of the Ornament of Realization, which later became the standard text on the perfection of wisdom at the Gelugpa Centers of Learning, and another text called Opening the Door to the Supreme Vehicle, which was an explanation of how to apply the stages of realizations as presented in Maitreya's ornament to one's personal practice. So that's another important theme, this idea of always bringing the philosophical ideas that were presented in Tsongkhapa's works, how he and his students always managed to bring that down to, you know, how do we put these instructions into practice. In the year 1404, at Manjushri's urging, he wrote a major commentary on Nagaboti's Kriya Samadra Sadhana Vyavastali. And he, during this time, also started teaching highest yoga tantra more widely. And in response, he started to receive many more requests for a synthesis of the understanding of Tantra. So he agreed, and at the age of 48, in the year 1405, he completed the great treatise on the stages of the path of Tantra, which weighed in at 600 pages and 14 chapters. He covered all 4 classes of Tantra, but the majority of the book is devoted to highest yoga Tantra. As his style, the same style that he used for writing the great stages on the path to enlightenment, he applied to this work. And so he brought together diverse approaches and distinct instructional lineages, put it all together into a coherent system that outlines the broad structures of the tantric path. And this book was was published, translated into English as a series of books. I think that definitely at least one of the books was translated by Jeffrey Hopkins, maybe all of them. so they're available. They came out a while ago though. So interestingly, by this time, so here we are in like 1405, did I say? Yeah. Both the Lamrim Chemo and the Ngangrim Chemo were commissioned to woodblock printers. So maybe woodblock printing was more available at that by then. But anyway, if you they spread quickly and widely because of the advance in technology. So I thought that was interesting. So now moving forward to the year 1407, The Essence of True Eloquence is the major work of that year. This is an important work because it established criteria for determining whether a scripture is definitive, so whether it could be taken literally, or whether it's interpretive or provisional, meaning it has to be understood in terms of more detailed interpretation. So J. Rinpoche said that this determination must be made on the basis of sound reasoning, not just the authority, like who wrote the scripture, but looking deeper into the reasons for determining for making this determination. And so he analyzed in particular two styles of textual hermeneutics and philosophical reasoning as evidenced by the works of Sangha and Nagarjuna in terms of how each of these great masters interpreted the perfection of wisdom sutras. So the writing style is that of an authoritative root text. It's concise, it's chantable, and easy to memorize. That was interesting too. Then in 1408, it's amazing how fast, J. Rinpoche was able to produce these works. It's just incredible. So just a year later, in 1408, he wrote The Ocean of Reasoning, which is an extensive, profound commentary on Nagarjuna's treatise on the Middle Way, which was written in response to requests from students. And seeing that the Madhyamika studies had declined in Tibet, he offered a fresh interpretation of both Buddhapalita and Chandrakirti's important commentaries on Nagarjuna's work. So what he was asking was, what are the implications of Nagarjuna's philosophy of emptiness with respect to the entire spectrum of Buddhist thought? If everything is empty and nothing exists in terms of intrinsic reality, why do Buddhists, or how do Buddhists motivate themselves on the path? That seems like one of the questions that often comes up, right? That we ask ourselves all the time. Then moving on to the year 1411, he completed major work on the Guhya Samadra completion stage, the lamp to illuminate the 5 stages. This is also available in English. It was translated by Bob Thurman and then also by Galvin Kitty. It's part of the Tibetan Jinpa's series. So it's a completion stage practice of Guhya Samadra based on Nagarjuna's 5 stages of completion. This was followed by another work, a shorter work called A Practical Guide to the 5 Stages in One Sitting, which contains both practical and experiential instructions on how to do the Guhya Samadra practice. So as Chapala mentioned, Tsongkhapa had several main highest Yoga Tantra Vajrayana practices, including Guhya Samadra, but also Kala Chakra, Yamantaka, and Chakra Samvara. And he wrote extensively on each of these practices. In 1415, he wrote a commentary on Chakra Samvara called Milking the Wish-Granting Cow, which was a survey of the literature and an account of the transmission of the Chakra Samvara Tantra in Tibet He also wrote sadhanas and an exposition on the completion stage, Chakrasamvara. He wrote the, going back to the sutra side, the middle-length treatise on the stages of the path. In 1416, he wrote a guide to the 6 yogas of Naropa, endowed with 3 convictions, excuse me. In 1418, he wrote the elucidation of the intent, which was an explanation of Chandrakirti's entering the middle way, which in turn was a supplement to Nagarjuna's treatise on the middle way. So, at that point, Tsongkhapa had already written the commentary on the treatise on the middle way, and he'd already written the essence of true eloquence. One might wonder, why was he writing about this topic again? But he, in his elucidation of the intent, he presented a very detailed examination of Chandrakirti's root text and the auto commentary. And it was written directly in response to renewed enthusiasm for Chandrakirti's interpretation of Nagarjuna, something which he himself, through his teachings and writings and those of his the other people that he inspired, right? This had caused the monastic community, and I guess the scholarly community in general, to take a renewed, to take a closer look at Chandrakirti. So he wanted to help that effort along. And finally, in 1419, his last major work was called Illuminating All the Hidden Meanings, which was a new version of the root tantra of Chakrasamvara, which was based on a careful reading of all the available translations and a close look at the Indian commentaries. So Chakrasamvara, he spent a considerable effort and time in clarifying the Chakrasamvara Vajrayana practice. Okay. Oh, there's also, for those of you who have the book, I'm not going to read it, I don't think, on pages 310 to 311. So a very interesting, some interesting notes on a teaching called the Door Frame Essential Instruction, which he gave on 9 aspects of the Vajrayana path. So again, these are like highly practical instructions to how to overcome specific difficulties in practice. So if that's something of interest to you, you can take time to look it up. So in conclusion, Tsongkhapa is respected as an innovator of scholastic methodologies and modes of inquiry. He's known as well for the breadth of the subject matter that he fearlessly tackled. He could easily have been a 5-star professor at any Ivy League university. He's renowned for his great emphasis on logic and reasoning. Not being content with the superficial understanding, he revisited the same core texts throughout his lifetime, deepening both his intellectual insight and his personal direct experience of the Dharma. He then taught extensively using his own written works, as well as, of course, many others, the source commentaries and root texts. He taught that huge, corpus of works to hundreds of monks at a time. His legacy lives on today because his works are an important part of the monastic curriculum. His works inspired many of his students and teachers to compose their own commentaries. So his standards of scholastic excellence and discoveries spread throughout the schools of Tibetan Buddhism. In terms of our own, personal practice, what does this all mean to us, having inherited this incredible treasury? So of course, we need to follow Lama Tsongkhapa's example. We need to eliminate distractions in our own lives. His spirit, as expressed in his fervent devotional prayers and his unshakable conviction gained through years of debate, study, and analytical and placement meditation. These are a source of tremendous, inspiration and engender, great courage and confidence, I think. So maybe we were one of Tsongkhapa's close students, meditating with him for years in isolated mountain hermitages. Maybe we were among the students who attended his teachings in monasteries, or we attended one of the great prayer festivals that he organized and taught at. Maybe that's why we have a connection with Lama Tsongkhapa today. Or maybe not, who knows? So maybe I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, as they say, but Lama Tsongkhapa has revealed the entire path to enlightenment, making it possible for ordinary people like me to pursue the path. So now it's up to me to roll up my sleeves and put in the effort to diligently follow his perfect instructions and eventually attain enlightenment, just as he did. So closing with the verse Mitsima, you are Avalokiteshvara, great treasury of objectless compassion. You are Manjushri, embodiment of stainless wisdom. You are the crown jewel amongst the learned of the land of snows. I supplicate at your feet, O Losang Drapa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anitindula. So please, again, two questions, unmuted, and then after that you mute it by yourself.
I'm sorry, you said one of his disciples wrote a book on wisdom that was based off of his last chapters in the Lamb Rim. Could you repeat that, please?
The title of the book?
Yeah, and the person.
Okay.
Well, you can just email me later. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay.
I also wanted to ask, because it sounded like when Tsongkhapa was born, the Buddhism was not stable in Tibet, and Chappelle mentioned that people were going off the path. How were his writings and teachings embraced at the time? Was he popular?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's what's, so wonderful is that even when he was, in his 20s, right, as soon as, because of his incredible erudition and I think the new way that he was able to, his new scholarship, he did things that no one else, had ever done, like going back, especially with the Golden Rosary, right? He went back to the source text, to the Indian commentaries, the classic texts themselves. And he put aside, a lot of the, and Jinpa mentions this specifically. He said he put aside what everybody else had already written. And he was like, well, no, wait a minute, let's start over. Let me really see what was going on. And so fortunately, yeah. And then his fame, just continued to spread. So he started out with a small group of monks, and he's going on these retreats and stuff, right? By the end of it, he'd show up at a monastery or something with like 600, like 1,000 students, and like, here we are. So fortunately, he had these, incredibly generous benefactors who, would sponsor such a large teaching. Like, here we are, 1,000 people for a year. They could do it, incredible merit, right? Imagine that.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else?
I just admire his practice. With his level of fame, he never gave into any kind of ego or any of that nonsense. He just stayed right with his practice, his studies, and his own, just direct practice, like struggling with really getting dependent origination. Because my understanding is he really did struggle with that, to get that directly. He got it conceptually, but he had to bring that into his daily life, in a very real way. So I do admire him for, obviously his intellectual ability was unbelievable, and just his practice, that's so important. He took what he learned and put it into practice, and he just passed that on to so many people, and he just stayed humble, and he stayed dedicated to the Dharma. So yeah, he's really an inspiration. Thank you.
It's great experience. Very point on. Thank you so much. Do you have more question on Lama Tsongkhapa's textile collection? Okay, then we're going to move to next. Please, Lobsang Dunyola.
Okay, thank you so much to both Venerable Dendro and Venerable Chimpa, for giving such wonderful presentations of Jay Rinpoche's life and works. And so now we're going to move more into the view of Jay Rinpoche, and particularly how it was unique amongst the Tibetan lineages and Tibetan scholars. So I just very briefly introduce myself, because I'm not, I'm only here temporarily because of the pandemic, essentially. But my name is Lobsang Dunyo. I generally study in the Sarajay Monastery in India, and I'm here in the US, and very grateful to be able to become connected with the NKL, and having the kindness of Kashila allowing me to stay here. So let's see what we have for the unique view of Jay Rinpoche. So to really understand and be able to discuss coherently how Jay Rinpoche's view is unique amongst the different Tibetan scholars, well, what would you really need to do is study all of the different Tibetan scholars to understand their views as well. I don't have that qualification. Luckily, Geshe Losang Targe has suggested that I reference someone who did have that qualification and his text. So this would be Tugen. Usually the kind of the short name of the text is just the Tugen Tenets. So the full name is called Crystal Mirror of Philosophical Systems, a Tibetan Study of Asian Religious Thought. And the author's full name is Tugen Losang Chogi Nima. So this is a text that is like a tenets text. I'm hoping many of you know somewhat about what the different tenet systems are, except instead of just going through the 4 tenet systems like most of the tenets texts do, this actually goes through the different Tibetan lineages and how they have slightly different views about things. It also goes into other Asian traditions that are not Tibetan, not Buddhist even. So that's it's kind of a unique work in the Tibetan corpus. The author, Tugen Losang Chukinima, or just Tugen, he was a disciple of Chankya Ropit Dorje, who is another, I guess, grand disciple. So he's a great grand disciple of Jay Rinpoche, because he was not a direct disciple of Jay Rinpoche a few generations later. So now we have this hermeneutic within the Tibetan way of thinking about Dharma, which is to describe Buddhism or Buddhist practice in terms of the view, the meditation, and the conduct. So that hermeneutic is followed in this text, the Crystal Mirror of Philosophical Systems, and it's a pretty good, and hermeneutic just means it's like a framework for being able to explain or interpret something. So it's like a way of interpreting and explaining different philosophical systems in terms of their view, their meditation, their conduct, or the way that they, you know, describe those. So when we talk about Tsongkhapa's unique views, it's like his unique view of what? Well, we can then look and say, oh, his unique view of the view, the meditation, and the conduct, right? So now we have his sort of outlook on these three things. And so before we really go into those three specifically, I think it merits maybe mentioning a little bit about something that's not really explicitly stated. It's not something that comes in the text as like a major category or a major point, but it's made. It's just made in a more kind of implicit way. And that point is about J. Rinpoche's uniqueness in his approach to study and learning. So I think that's something, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the current 14th Dalai Lama, I think that him and J. Rinpoche share a very close bond in this way, in that their approach in general to studying and learning Dharma is one that we could call more academic, more scientific, more rigorous than many, many other teachers, scholars, and practitioners, and yogis, and so forth. So there's this commitment. I think I'll just quote, and Chipo, please correct me if the quote's too off. I'm sure it's not exactly, but one thing that Chipo said in his sharing the biography, the Tsongkhapa's rigorous dedication to philosophical analysis and logic is what would become the basis for his tradition. So I hope that was close enough to what you actually said. But the general point being that J. Rinpoche really put this incredible emphasis on going back to the Indian treatises, just as His Holiness the Dalai Lama today, with his sort of spearheading this great project. Now, you may know the second volume of the series has just been published in English, just been released. So it's this project of text, which His Holiness views as sort of being textbooks that could really be used in an academic setting to study about the worldview of the ancient, the Indian Buddhists. And it's called the Science and Philosophy in the Indian Buddhist Classics. So the second volume in that series is on the mind, which was just released a few weeks ago. So I highly recommend you look into those if you really want to get a sense of J. Rinpoche's uniqueness. The way to do that would be, one way to do that would be not only reading his own works, but reading the foundational materials that he looked to and seeing how, just as Venerable Tindral talked about, his ability to synthesize all these different materials from the great Indian treatises into these sort of, very systematic works, the Lam Rimchembo, the Not Rimchembo, etc. So this new book that His Holiness has organized, he didn't write it himself. There's a team of geshes that sort of got together to do that, but it also synthesizes. It takes many points from different Indian treatises and makes it into an understandable, comprehensive, and organized form that you could just read through and go, oh, that's what this means. Because, one of the key points, again, Venerable Tendro had mentioned the four greatnesses that Tsongkhapa mentions in the Lam Rim, the four great aspects of that teaching. And one of them is that it allows you to come to see all of the Buddhist teachings as instructions for practice. So I think that's a key point to keep in mind. So we have also this sort of, just if you look at the actual style of writing, J. Rinpoche really, I'm thinking of him and his disciples and grand disciples together. They really started to make their writings be almost more like contemporary modern day academic journals, in the sense that they're really taking up other positions of people that they disagree with. And they're saying, look, this is the fault there, this is the fault. They're using rigorous analysis and based on the system of logic that we have from the Pramanavartika, Dharmakirti, and Dignaga. And so they're really kind of engaging in a very direct way and a very rigorous way with philosophical material, such that it really, and then because so much of it is related to the human mind, as that's what the main point of Dharma is, then it really becomes a cognitive science. It's like a very, a very precise form of cognitive science, which is sort of going back and forth between different perspectives in these texts, which doesn't seem like it was done really to that degree and that with that degree of rigor in Tibet beforehand. Not saying there weren't very profound and well-written philosophical treatises before J. Rinpoche, there were, but not to the same degree of that kind of rigor that really takes apart other people's views and ideas, and kind of has a real dialogue going back and forth. So that's one uniqueness of the way J. Rinpoche wrote and sort of tried to get people to think about Dharma, and it got carried on by his disciples. Which again, primarily thinking of the textbook authors of the three great monastic seats of Tibet, which J. Rinpoche's students were founders of those seats, and grand students of J. Rinpoche were the authors of those textbooks. So, and that's like Sarah Drepung and Ganden, right? Ganden, of course, the one that J. Rinpoche himself founded. So, okay, now let's see what else to say about that is just maybe a kind of a side point, but I think it's nice to relate His Holiness's approach to Dharma to J. Rinpoche's, partly because their lives reflect each other in some very interesting ways and have a lot of points in common. Not in every single way, of course, they're each very unique individuals, but one thing is just their backgrounds. They both were sort of born and immediately recognized as really powerful individuals, or some kind of holiness associated with them from a very young age, and their acumen and their intellectual capacities were acknowledged from a very young age. And of course, later people would come to recognize them as having been enlightened, from the get-go, even though their own way of expressing their sort of spiritual development actually goes through a spiritual evolution where they learned over time and changed their perspective over time. And I think a very interesting point about that is shared in common with both of their lives, their histories, which speaks to their emphasis on rigorous study and looking to the Indian treatises for sort of authentic explanations of the Dharma, is the fact that both of them gained realization of emptiness while reading a text. And that's, I think, quite an interesting point. Now, J. Rinpoche, he Rinpoche went through his biography, and also Tendro mentioned that the realization in 1398 of emptiness came after a dream where he was sort of approached by Buddha Palita, Nagarjuna, and various other masters, and Buddha Palita placed a text on his head, and as reading the text by Buddha Palita, and I'll just read from this text by Tuken. He says, when J. Rinpoche was looking at the Buddha Palita commentary on the fundamental treatise on the middle way, he saw the commentary on the passage from the 8th chapter of the fundamental treatise on the middle way. Again, so the Buddha Palita text is a commentary to Nagarjuna's text. Right? Nagarjuna's text is the fundamental treatise on the middle way. So that chapter 8, is called Analysis of Agency. The actual quote said, the agent depends on the action and the action on the agent. I see no way of establishing them in which they do not arise dependently. So that's here, Tugen is saying that he heard that from his Lama, Changi Rinpoche Dorje, that was the verse J. Rinpoche was reading when he actually had the realization of emptiness. I did watch what Tindra mentioned, some wonderful talks by Robert Thurman about J. Rinpoche's life, and that Robert Thurman mentioned from the oral tradition that he received from his Lama, who he didn't name, it was a different verse. So there was, I think, a verse that said, the person is not the aggregates, and there's also not other than the aggregates. So I think that that's just an interesting little aspect of Tibetan sort of culture / the way Dharma is transmitted, that there's always sort of option A, option B, like different ways of getting a lineage that are slightly different. And that just is, well, that's just part of the process, I guess, of, what do we call it? You know, passing down or things orally. And so, you know, the game of telephone, if you will. So, but my point being, it's you know, we may have to ask Rinpoche himself to find out what he really was reading, but the fact that he was reading a text, that's pretty incredible, that he had his realization of emptiness, not up, you know, sitting on some mountaintop, like having spent, you know, 3 weeks in samadhi. He was reading a book, right? And His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he says he gained a type of realization. He, you know, says that it wasn't the full realization of emptiness, but a realization of the selflessness of the self-existent the selflessness of the self-sufficient, substantially existent person, which is a grosser form of realization. But he said that happened when he was reading J. Rinpoche's text. The I forget the way that Venerable Tendril, you translated the title, but Gompa Rapsa, Uma Gompa Rapsa. I know there's different ways of, if you want to chime in and say what the title in English was or not, whatever. But there's different ways of translating that title. But the commentary, again, on Chandrakirti's text, there's a commentary in the Nagarjuna's Fundamental Treatise of the Middle Way. While reading that text, and there is a line where it says that the person is merely designated in dependence upon the aggregates. And that's when His Holiness had that realization. So that's one thing. Now let's go into what it means, right, to have a different view than others. I think this is an important point to think about. You know, when we say J. Rinpoche's view was unique, his understanding of emptiness was unique. And now when we say view here, you know, it's in terms of the three, view, meditation, and conduct, it's like more expressly talking about their view of emptiness. So when J. Rinpoche's view of emptiness, you know, he realized it, and it was sort of uniquely correct, profound. You know, this, what are we saying? Are we saying that no one else in Tibet had the correct view of emptiness? Are we saying no one else in Tibet had ever realized emptiness? Well, that's a question that is addressed by Tugen in this text as well. And so, just go to it. I don't have them all kind of collected in one document, and just have the page numbers written down. So give me a second while I pull it up. So here, oh, let me finish down. So here, oh, let's go right one. Okay, 354. Pardon me, just getting to the page. And here he says, you may well ask, well then, must it be said that even such previous holy beings as the Father Marpa and his spiritual son Milarepa, the Father Sachin Kongden Dingpo and his spiritual sons, the Father Drumtan and his spiritual sons, and Bhutan, Ngolotsawa, Rendawa, and now Rendawa was Tsongkhapa's own principal teacher, right? Especially regarding emptiness. Rendawa and others did not realize the profound meaning? The reply is, although there is no certainty regarding their followers, okay, it cannot be said that those eminent beings did not realize the Madhyamaka view, meaning that it could be said they did realize it, right? We're not saying they didn't realize it. Nonetheless, when it came to writing great texts that established the profound Madhyamaka system through flawless scripture and reasoning, elucidating without confusion the intention of the Father Nagarjuna and his spiritual sons, nothing like what the omniscient J wrote had previously appeared. So I think that's the main point, you know, it's not saying that no one else had ever realized emptiness. It's saying that the way J. Rinpoche was able to elucidate the view of emptiness and the process for gaining the view of emptiness as a practitioner, meditator, or whatever, that was unique. And he made it much more clear, precise, vivid, and by bringing in all these different amazing practitioners who had realized emptiness from the Indian, you know, the amazing Buddhist culture of India that gave birth to so many realized beings. He brought their thoughts in, he brought, you know, his own experience in, he brought other Tibetans' views in to contrast them to his own. By bringing all that together, he was able to show the view of emptiness and how to realize it more clearly than the scholars or practitioners before him had. And even just in, again, in the style of writing, you know, a lot of Tibetan texts, not all of them, a lot, you know, before that were written in verse, like Milarepa's texts. Well, they're mostly, you know, Milarepa didn't write philosophical treatises in the same way. He, you know, his thing was songs, which are all in verse. So Tsongkhapa really, you know, took the time to write in prose and to write very thoroughly and go through and, you know, make just more full explanations. So you could say that Marpa and Milarepa, you know, they taught the correct view of emptiness, they realized the correct view of emptiness, but they didn't necessarily write about it as clearly. And again, you know, you could say, well, for their particular students they're writing for, it was enough for them to gain the correct view. You know, that's the whole thing within Buddhism about the teacher only teaches what's required for their disciples to understand something. So maybe just for whatever reason, the Tibetan people's minds, you know, were changing over time, and Tsongkhapa, you know, saw that they needed to hear things in a different way, a more explicit way. So this also is backed up by His Holiness. I just want to quote, because this is just so you know that this essay exists, or it's a transcription from a talk in the book called Kindness, Clarity, and Insight. It's the last chapter. The last chapter is called Union of the Old and New Translation Schools. And so just the intro paragraph, His Holiness says, "For a long time, I have had the one-pointed belief that Nyingma, Sakya, Kagyu, and Gelug are all unions of sutra and mantra, as well as being of the consequence school," that's Prasangika Madhyamaka, "in terms of the view of emptiness. Therefore, I have had hope and interest in coming to know the various styles of explaining the view, meditation, and conduct in these schools, and have made effort in this regard." So His Holiness is, you know, backing up that very point that, you know, really all the four lineages of Tibetan Buddhism have the correct view. It's just not necessarily explained as clearly as J. Rinpoche did. And of course, J. Rinpoche himself had an impact on the later, you know, people who came later, even if they maintained their affiliation with other schools. If they, you know, didn't all convert to you know, convert, or I don't know if that was even the right word, but they didn't all start to consider themselves Gelugpas, but certainly they read J. Rinpoche's works. This is my own experience. I took a course at a Kagyu monastery in Kathmandu, where the teacher, he taught the text we were studying, he taught the three principal aspects of the path by J. Rinpoche, with a commentary by Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Taye, who was a great Rimei master and from the 19th century. So it clearly influenced them. They even teach and write comment, you know, other scholars from other traditions even write commentaries on his texts and teach them. So there's that. Okay. Yet, so just to point out, so even with all that, there's going to be people who have wrong understanding of things, and that, you know, it just is the nature of our ignorance as human beings, right? So there are people who come and write things which don't present the correct view based on probably not having the correct view, right? So even though we're saying, yes, there are great masters from all traditions who have the correct view, there also are not as great masters who don't have the correct view. So what do we say about that? So let me just go back up to this other quote from our text by Tugin. So here he says the great majority of Tibetan philosophical system adherents have, when referring to those who have studied many scriptural collections, made logician and teacher pejorative terms. Having abandoned study, they meditate in the hope of being freed merely by meditating on the channels, winds, and drops, or by being introduced to seeing the bare nature of mind, which are minor practices. Even those who are proud of their studies are content with incomplete or minor textual systems. So now he's saying like these are wrong, wrong ways of thinking about study and practice. So then he quotes Tukin quotes the Ornament of Mahayana Sutras, an Indian text by Maitreya, where he says, here it is on the basis of study that proper thinking will arise, and so forth. Your mental continuum should be trained gradually through study, reflection, and meditation on the scriptures of the Tripitaka. So that's again just a general, going in very general terms about how some people just approach their whole approach to study and practice is a little bit off. So okay, so that's just the general, right? Now let's go into a little bit honing down into those three categories: view, meditation, and conduct, and how those things differ from different scholars compared with Che Rinpoche. Now, like I said, view, that word can mean different things in different contexts. So in general, when we talk about view, meditation, and conduct, the view is really talking about the view of emptiness, or you could say also the view of the two truths, sort of the view of ultimate truth and conventional truth. But really more strongly, it refers to the view of emptiness. In general, if you've probably heard from His Holiness or read in His Holiness's books that, overall in Buddhism, there's the view of dependent arising and the conduct of non-violence or non-harm. So that's like the general commonly accepted view and conduct of all Buddhists, whether they're Tibetan or from other countries, whether they're Mahayana or different traditions, Theravada or Pure Land or whatever it is, all the different Buddhist practices, traditions, philosophical schools, they all accept that there's, yes, dependent arising is the basis of the view, non-violence, non-harming to other sentient beings, basis of the conduct. So here we're really talking more about, again, sort of already accepting that, yeah, all the Tibetans basically accept that there is, that the phenomena are empty. Now, what does that mean? What does emptiness mean? What is the view? How is the view of emptiness developed? So now we're going more into a specific thing. So this wouldn't even be addressed by, many Theravada practitioners or teachers. They don't accept the Mahayana Sutras. They don't accept emptiness as something taught by the Buddha, at least to the degree that it shows up in the Pali canon, they would accept it and they wouldn't really think much about it, or talk much about it as it shows up in the Mahayana Sutras. Okay, so now let's go back to page 352. Okay, so now what Losang Chogi Nima does is quite amazing because he does it in a pretty condensed way, but he goes through several different views related to both the view of emptiness as well as the meditation practice, how meditation should be cultivated. He goes through many different perspectives and he kind of goes one by one and points out faults. Now I'm not going to go through every single one and how he points out all the faults, but I recommend you read this if you want to see those. But I will just say, it's funny because this text came, I don't know the exact years of this author, but again, he was a couple generations after J. Rinpoche himself. So we could just roughly say sometime in the 16th century. And you see now, like I said, I haven't really studied all the different traditions of Tibet, the different lineages. I just have impressions though from my just over time having read books here and there or heard teachings here and there from scholars or lamas from different traditions, what I can say based on that is that a lot of the things that he's presenting in this book, just like things that J. Rinpoche brings up right in the Lamrim Chenmo itself and his other works, are still views held by people to this day. So people do teach or speak about, sometimes it's just like students who have misunderstandings and they're just kind of holding the wrong ideas of things. Sometimes it's more the way that something is explicitly taught by a teacher. Now, whether or not, there's just a different way of interpreting it that they would give is another question. But there are a lot of these views that you will hear people express them, whether they're just Dharma friends or people in the Dharma center somewhere, or if they're an actual Lama. So it's really pay attention, because they're important. That you may even have noticed you have some of them in your own mind from things that you've read over the years. So where do we have a quote here? He says, they say, so this is saying some other practitioners or scholars, they say when meditating, you should settle on thinking nothing about either existent self or non-existent self, emptiness or non-emptiness, and so forth. Thinking nothing is meditation on reality. That very non-seeing is proper seeing. Seeing this, those people are stuck in the view and meditation of the system of Hashang. So I'm hoping that term Hashang, just very briefly. That was a person who represented certain Chinese views on meditation and emptiness that were present way back during the time of King Trizang Detsen, who invited Shantarakshita to establish Buddhism in Tibet, as well as Guru Rinpoche, Padma Sambhava. And then after Shantarakshita got old and he passed away, but he told the King Trizang Detsen to invite his disciple Kamalashila from India. So this was now all the way going back to the 8th century in Tibet. So Hashang and Kamalashila had a debate. So here, what is he saying? So the point being that there are still people in Tibet who hold the view of this, that of the person who was defeated in the debate, who was representing the sort of mistaken view of some Chinese practitioners, that, what is the view? That thinking nothing is meditation on reality. Non-seeing is proper seeing. So that's one thing. What's the reason that it's mistaken? Well, he goes on and says, since that very thought, I will think nothing, quote unquote, I will think nothing, is thinking something, this view seems only a mass of contradictions. So again, this is being quite literal, you could say, a very precise and literal approach to understanding the mind and what conceptual thought is. So this goes back to my first comments about how Tsongkhapa really emphasized an approach that really opened up the Dharma and made it into a cognitive science. And so he has a very clear understanding of what conceptual thought is and how it can be both virtuous or non-virtuous, how it can function to, how it can actually, you can have a realization of emptiness, which is conceptual. Not only can you, but you need to, that necessarily precedes having a direct non-conceptual understanding of emptiness. So the view he's challenging is that people say just from the very beginning, just let your mind be non-conceptual, don't think about anything. And now, he's coming and saying that's not going to work. And besides, when you sit there thinking, I'm thinking nothing, that itself is conceptuality. You haven't actually gotten rid of conceptuality. You're misidentifying what conceptuality means, what conceptuality is. So that's sort of one point about the view. Now, as time is quickly going, I would just like to not go through every quote that I picked out here, but what I'll do is now just say, what is then the essence of Tsongkhapa's view of the view, Tsongkhapa's view of emptiness? It's one that is a union of dependent arising and emptiness, one where dependent arising goes as the meaning of emptiness and emptiness goes as the meaning of dependent arising. Now, this is something that from what I've seen in contemporary Lamas, works or talks when they're explaining Dharma, they don't emphasize this so much. It's really not. If you go and look at the most popular masters of the day and whatever other traditions that are non-Gelug, you will see. But please correct me if I'm wrong, and you start to see it everywhere, and I just didn't know it's possible. But from what I've seen, they really don't emphasize this point. Whereas for Tsongkhapa, this is the key point of emptiness. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, just in one of the recent teachings, it was either the one with the Taiwanese or the Russians from a few weeks within the last couple months, someone asked the question, why is dependent arising the king of reasonings, the king of reasons? And His Holiness replied that it's because dependent arising, that reason allows you to gain, or to establish both emptiness of true existence as well as conventional existence simultaneously. Establish both ultimate truth and conventional truth simultaneously. Or another way to say it is that you eliminate the two extremes simultaneously. So you can do that just with that one reason. And so let me see if I can just throw in a couple quotes. So there's a wonderful book by Jeffrey Hopkins, which was recently made, where he brings in material from many sources, and the whole book is about how emptiness comes to mean dependent arising, and dependent arising comes to mean emptiness. And it's really beautiful. It's like 500 pages, so he really goes into detail with it and brings a lot of source material in. But and it's available online for free on the UMA website if you want to look that up. So I'm just going to quote from here, but he's actually just quoting from other sources. So page 326. Just 1 second to get to the page. .336. Oh, I see. Because the page is on the. Never mind. Don't need to say why I'm taking long. Okay, here it is. So this is now Tsongkhapa is quoting in the middle length Lamrim. He's quoting from a sutra called Questions of Anavatapta, King of Naga Sutra. Those which are produced from causes and conditions are not produced. They have no inherent nature of production. Therefore, those which rely on causes and conditions are said by the conqueror to be empty. A person who knows the emptiness of inherent existence is conscientious. And then to comment on it in the middle length Lamrim, he says, then, since the third line speaks of contingent on and relying on conditions as the meaning of the emptiness of establishment by way of its own entity, the emptiness of inherent establishment is the meaning of dependent arising. So here he's establishing from a sutra that the meaning of emptiness of inherent establishment is the meaning of dependent arising. So this is the key of the uniqueness of Tsongkhapa's view of emptiness. And so maybe just one more quick quote before the next two sections on meditation and conduct. I think we can go through more quickly. So I'll just give one more quote here because it's important. So Tsongkhapa also wrote, and this one, it doesn't say right here which text it was in. I think it is in, it's either the middle or the Lamrim or the Lamrim Chenmo. Hence, through dependent arising itself, they gain ascertainment of the emptiness that negates inherent existence. And therefore they become accustomed immediately upon seeing, hearing, or being mindful that sprouts and so forth rely on causes and conditions, to contemplating the principle of the absence of inherent existence through just that fact. So I think this is really beautiful because it's showing how the uniqueness of Tsongkhapa's understanding of dependent arising and emptiness allows someone who's gained familiarity with it, who's become accustomed to it, that when they immediately see, hear, or are mindful that sprouts and so forth, any condition, phenomena, anything, basically anything in our world that arises from causes. So any of these things, just thinking about knowing that, being mindful that they arose from causes and conditions, then allows them to understand emptiness, the absence of inherent existence. And then he also, in other sections, kind of goes the other way around. Just being mindful of emptiness allows, and this is in there's a verse in the three principal aspects of the path that makes this clear. Just being aware of emptiness allows one to be aware of dependent arising. So this is pretty much the heart of that unique view. But I think how it really comes out in the life, in the works of J. Rinpoche, just like His Holiness the Dalai Lama today, because you can imagine, you know, the previous two speakers went through how J. Rinpoche really, you know, he was almost a revolutionary in terms of how much impact he had on Tibetan culture and society. And so you can see in the four great deeds that Venerable Chöpa mentioned, you know, it's not the deed of realizing emptiness. It's not the deed of doing a lot of prostrations. It's not the deed of attaining samadhi or shamatha. Right? Those aren't listed as the great deeds of Tsongkhapa. But what are? It's things that had a direct impact on the society around him. So it's really kind of bringing out the light that the great works, the great things J. Rinpoche did were not just his own inner meditation, but the way he was able to, through his inner meditation, see that emptiness means dependent arising. If you see that, then you can see how he did these great things to benefit the people around him. He resurrected these amazing temples that give people faith. And, you know, when Dharma was first brought into Tibet back in the, you know, the 7th century, at the time of King Songtsen Gampo, you know, 100 years before the first monastery was ever established, what was the first thing they did? They built a bunch of temples that were just places of worship, right? You know, Songtsen Gampo's wives, one from Nepal and one from China, each brought a statue of the Buddha. One was, I think, of Maitreya. I don't know, I forget who they were of, but brought two statues that were, you know, enthroned in shrines that became, you know, a source for the people, for the Tibetan people to really develop faith before they even really learned about the Dharma from reading and learning texts. They had something that gives them faith. And so J. Rinpoche resurrected those places. He brought people together for this great prayer festival for 15 days. You know, things that really allowed the people to kind of deepen their spiritual practice. And of course, you know, the Vinaya, which I'll come to in a second as the last of the three of these sections, but, you know, his emphasis on the monastic Sangha and having pure conduct for the Sangha obviously had a huge impact on Tibetan society, which you definitely can see today. Is, you know, all the schools of Tibetan Buddhism, major and minor, you know, they hold the conduct of the monastics. They hold the conduct which J. Rinpoche made clear was the proper conduct for monastics. Before his time, there was a lot of, you know, iffy stuff going on. Maybe you'll find in some little pockets here and there similar stuff going on today. I've heard stories, so I'm not saying it's completely gone, but anyway, that's just humans, right? Okay, so moving on to the meditation. So I'll just do this pretty quickly. And for those of you who had been following the Lamrim classes on Tuesdays, then we've been discussing that a bit because we've been talking about shamatha or serenity, and Geshe Nongkilsang gave very clear explanations about how J. Rinpoche's explanation was different from some other Tibetans and Indians as well. So there's a quote again here in this text by Tuken. So if I go here, so just 1 second. So here he's quoting Saraha. Now I made a mistake myself as when I was translating for Geshe Kelsang. Geshe Kelsang, if any of you were here, and I said that there was this idea from some Indian school. It's actually a great Buddhist saint, Saraha. That the quote comes in this text. I didn't see it before. It just must be that there was some misunderstanding of it by certain Tibetan practitioners. That's the point that was made by Geshe. I just didn't understand it properly. Anyway, what's the quote? The quote by Saraha: "The mind itself, so strictly bound, is freed when released, no doubt." So then we have this saying that comes based on a misunderstanding of that, which says the best relaxation is the best meditation. So that's the quote that J. Rinpoche, we went through in the Lamrim Chenmo, very clearly kind of shows how that's not correct, because you need to have a concentration which has both qualities, both characteristics, of the clear appearance with the vivid intensity, right? Clarity with vivid intensity, as well as the single pointed stability. So then Tukin himself just sums that up. Um, he says, for people who think in that way, that good relaxation is good meditation, they release the well-guarded mind. They reinforce subtle laxity, confusing that with good meditation, they waste their lives in that state. So I think that summarizes J. Rinpoche's uniqueness of his way of teaching meditation, his perspective on meditation. Actually, Tukin goes through 11 specific points. I'll just like read a couple of them just so you get an idea. So he says, you know, some by saying conceptual thoughts are the great ignorance that plunges you into the ocean of samsara, say that conceptual thoughts are ignorance. Some say that conceptual thoughts are the Dharmakaya. Some say that when the mind abides clearly and vividly without elaboration, that is Buddha or Nirvana. And when the mind elaborates even a little, that is sentient beings or samsara. So again, the main thing is just that these people are not really understanding what conceptual thought means and how it actually is to be utilized for spiritual development. And it's just like a natural part of being a living being, a human being, that that we need to utilize for gaining more wisdom, not just saying that its nature is ignorance. So that's kind of the main point there. Okay, and now conduct. I'll just read one quote from here, and we kind of went through that already, and the previous two talks really emphasized how J. Rinpoche is working to teach the Vinaya in the way he did really transformed Tibetan society and the way that a lot of people thought about conduct and how to act. So here we'll just give one more quote. So here it says, actually this is a quote that Tukin is quoting from a Tantra. And he says, the Tantra says, maintaining a Shravaka's conduct on the outside and experiencing the joy of Guhya Samaja on the inside. Then he comments on that. In conformity with that statement, J. Rinpoche maintained completely pure conduct, practicing the yoga of the two stages and so forth, while properly observing the entire code of conduct specified in the Vinaya. On top of that, he protected, as he would his own eyes, the rules prescribed in the Bodhisattva and Tantric Vinayas. His life was that pure. So then that summarizes how he engaged with ethical conduct and how he taught it to his disciples. Okay, thank you so much. And I would like to invite for the Q&A if people still have questions about the previous two talks, and then Venerable Tendro and Venerable Chimpa want to also, if you have things to add as well, please do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a new mic. So you said J. Tsongkhapa that he realized emptiness while reading. But we're kind of taught that you realize emptiness while meditating. So we can hope that we can just be reading a book and realize emptiness, or I just assume it has to be through shamatha.
No, that's not. I don't think. So this is maybe a misunderstanding, because you don't need to have shamatha as a prerequisite to realize emptiness. To realize emptiness, you simply need to have a correct reason, and then to realize the three modes of a proof that proves that, some object, for instance, this is now going back to like the logic, the way that logic is explained by Dharmakirti in that structure. So you have a reason such as there's the subject, a sprout, is empty of true existence because it's a dependent arising. So all you have to do is realize the three modes of that reason: being a dependent arising, that there's a pervasion with being empty, that it's a property of a sprout. So it's said that people on the debate courtyard, monks, in Saran, for instance, and other places in Tibet, realized emptiness on the debate courtyard while being questioned by someone. They're sitting there and they realize emptiness. That's sort of a common thing that's said, whether or not, of course, we don't know if that's really true. So the idea being that analytical meditation, where you're using reasoning, doesn't require the complete attainment of shamatha. I would, though, just also add to that, there's no reason to think that J. Rinpoche hadn't already achieved shamatha by that point. He could have been reading and have attained shamatha. Or, yeah, no, that might be tricky because, well, I'm not sure if that really makes sense. I mean, he might have attained shamatha, but he probably wasn't meditating on it, because if his eye consciousness was, he was focused on something he was reading, it wouldn't make sense he was actually in some samadhi at that moment. But he may have had the background of having attained shamatha already at that point. That's something I can't say. But in general, it's not needed. Yeah, it's not needed. I don't know if you've heard that explicitly, or you just got that idea from the way things are taught. But
Oh yeah, I just, I'm not too sure. Sorry.
Mhm.
It just sounded, it's a nice idea that you can just realize emptiness while reading.
Yeah, I mean, it still takes a lot. There's a lot that's needed, but you can just.
Oh yeah, it's not like you can do it while you're doing the dishes.
And maybe just to clarify, because you've been following the long room classes, when just last class 2 days ago, Geshe-la did mention, and of course it's clear in the text, that there is a definite order: shamatha for serenity, and then vipassana for insight. Now that's just in terms of the sort of precise definition of how J. Rinpoche is defining vipassana based on his reading of the Indian treatises, especially Kamala Shila and Maitreya and Asanga. So that way of defining vipassana, that's not saying that that's the only kind of realization of emptiness, right? You could have vipassana realizing emptiness. You can also have a mind realizing emptiness that is not that precisely defined vipassana mind. I don't know if maybe Geshe-dage is oh.
Was it your main at that? So everyone do not have any question for Lobsang there?
I just want to say that Tsongkhapa emphasized to take advantage, make the best of reborn, being use our intellect, and make progress on that. And everybody did that today, and I very much appreciate that. I very much appreciate all their efforts to try to help us along on that path. Like I say, Japel brought this up last night of just, it's so important to not waste time, just to be, to make every day, every moment count, and not to waste, this precious rebirth as a human being, and this using the intellect as well as the heart to make progress. It's really, it's really good advice. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for everyone. I do not expect it, the participating that much comes, because it's a weekday. So, but it's wonderful for your dedicated time for celebrating Lama Tsongkhapa's day, and then some involved in listening practice and do some for. Yeah, this is wonderful, great, and also like to thank you for participate, whoever, all of you, and special thanks for the three of you to presented. So that's great now. So we have a Lama Tsongkhapa prayer at the evening, and Pew will become, most of you can join by Zoom. And then also you can do some setup offering in your house, your order. And then while we're doing prayer here, you can also offer for there, and then join with us prayer. The same prayer will be doing in more Tibetan, but we have a translation and phonetic vote. So as Chapa will show you as usual. Thank you so much, and then see you again in the evening, 6 o'clock. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.